This course will introduce you to some of the main thinkers in educational psychology. We've called the course Learning, Knowledge and Human Development. We'll be dealing with the history and the paradigms in educational psychology. There are 3 that we're going to focus on. The first one will be about behaviorism and conditioned response. The second one about brain developmentalism, and the third on social cognitivism. So first we're going to deal with behaviorism and conditioned response. Here we're going to look at 3 psychologists, men of the 20th century, who were interested in the way in which environmental sources impacted on learning and the role of intelligence in the limits of learning. The first one is Ivan Pavlov, a Russian Nobel Prize winner, and he worked to establish the ways in which you could condition or stimulate behaviour. Secondly, we're going to look at John Watson, an American. He too was interested in how to predict and control behaviour, and in fact he established the scholarly field of behaviorism. The third one, of course, is B.F. Skinner, also an American, and he believed that people's behaviours were dependent on the consequences of previous actions, so thus they could be conditioned to respond in specific ways. We're also going to look at 2 others who were part of this period. Alfred Binet, a Frenchman who invented the IQ test, originally as a method for providing remedial help to those who wanted it, and Henry Goddard, an American who expanded the uses of IQ tests. Also, he was interested in using it as a way to detect feeble-minded immigrants into America. And in fact, he was quite influential in the formation of special education. All these thinkers are highly cited and had tremendous implications for education, and Bill will now elaborate on that.
I'm going to start looking at some of these people in a little bit more detail. Not much detail. This is really just a very rough overview, a schematic overview, trying to introduce some of the key ideas that have influenced education over the last century and a half, essentially. So Ivan Pavlov is, in a way, one of the founders of modern psychology and famous for so-called Pavlov's dog, or Pavlov's dogs in his laboratory. So what he did was he got the dogs used to the idea that when a buzzer was sounded, that they were going to get food. It's to be expected that that when a dog sees food, that he might salivate. But what was interesting is the dogs learned that the buzzer meant that food was coming, and they salivated at the sound of the buzzer. So this is the idea of a conditioned reflex that was constructed by Pavlov, and in a way based on the premise that animals can learn in the same way that humans can learn. John B. Watson is the person who introduced the word behaviorism, and the basic premise behind Watson's thinking was we really can't know much about consciousness in a self-reflective kind of way. What we can really know about is scientific observation of what people do, hence the idea of behaviorism. So what he was really trying to do is move thought about mind and learning away from introspection, philosophical self-reflection, if you like, towards a scientific observation of actual behaviour. So this is quite an important idea that he invents that becomes then tremendously influential in the 20th century. Moving on, perhaps the most famous behaviourist of all is B.F. Skinner, who is seen here in this picture with some of his pigeons. He worked with rats, he worked with pigeons. He invented a thing called the Skinner box, and what he did with the Skinner box was he gave all sorts of rewards and reinforcements to animals with food based on certain behaviours that they did. And he showed that, in fact, it was possible to train rats and pigeons in these kinds of ways. He became a kind of a notorious kind of person. People think now of Skinner in quite negative kinds of terms, and behaviorism is in quite negative kinds of terms. But in a sense, behind this was this idea about the environmental conditions of learning, which are common to all sentient creatures. So here is the a little picture of the Skinner box. This is actually taken from one of Skinner's books. It's one of his actual diagrams of a Skinner box. And the idea that he developed was this one of operant conditioning, which is, you're in these conditions of behaviour, these things get reinforced. Operant conditioning is the process that Skinner describes. A funny story in a way, it's funny, tragic, I don't know what we can think about it now, is that he, even for his own baby, this is his own child, invented a thing called the Heir Conditioner, spelled H-E-I-R, which was this box in which you could put a baby just with a diaper. There was a roll of paper at the bottom there. You can see at the bottom of the image there a roll of paper where if the baby soiled or made a mess, you just roll the paper out the other end. It's in a same temperature all the time, and the family's protected from the baby as well around the noise. And when Ladies' Home Journal wrote a story about it, obviously the editor wasn't terribly amused and they called it Baby in a Box. So what Skinner tried to do was transfer the learning that he had achieved in his laboratory with rats and pigeons literally to human beings in the case of his own child. But then becomes an advocate of teaching machines. So what Skinner does in the 1950s is patent a teaching machine. Now this is kind of interesting these days because one of the questions I would like to ask, here's a picture of Skinner's patent, and then here is a picture of a teaching machine that Skinner uses to illustrate learning activities. It's worth stopping for a moment to read the caption because it does have the same kinds of processes around operant conditioning that he'd tried out with animals, which he was then trying out with humans. So the critique of this stuff is that it's very, very mechanical. It's individual stimulus and response. It's a kind of it's portrayed as dehumanizing. But what's kind of interesting about it, nevertheless, is the fact that what he's interested in doing and what the behaviourists in general are interested in doing is tracing the dynamics of environment in learning, these micro conditions of learning things incrementally based on things that are moving in the environment. So in a way, it's dismissed perhaps a little bit too easily these days in terms of its basic insights. In the same period, we also have the emergence of the notion of intelligence testing. It began with Alfred Binet. In a way, this is kind of the opposite of behaviorism in a way. It's not about the conditions of learning from the environment. It's about innate capacities which are variable across human beings and which essentially are not changeable. So the reason why we have an intelligence test is, yes, we can learn certain things, but only within the parameters of what our intelligence is, and intelligence is variable. The founder of this idea is Alfred Binet, and then the person who actually then creates the idea of an IQ and the mathematics of calculating IQ scores is Goddard, an American Goddard. Now I might say just incidentally that Mary and I are speaking in this very overview schematic kind of way about these people just by way of introducing them. At our New Learning Online website, which supports this course, what we've done is taken extracts from the source text. It's actually very, very interesting to go back and read what these people are actually saying. It's too easy a century or a century and a half later to be regarding them as caricatures. These are complex, smart people. What they're saying is often flawed, it's often problematic, but it's instructive to go back to the actual sources. So there on the website, we have text and images, and even for the more recent people, some videos, which allows you to get a feel for who these people really were and what their agenda was at the time.
Behaviorism remains a very powerful force even today. It's taught, a lot of people still believe in it, but classical behaviorists, and this is important, did not allow for free will or agency in human behaviour. For them, everything depended on the environment and the pattern responses that can be conditioned by positive and negative stimuli. So although the insight into the role of environment is really valuable, it has led in education to very narrow and repetitive drills and rewards and punishments in educational settings that don't necessarily extend the learners in the way they might be. And also, it does not allow or explain how language develops. So although it's still there as a choice that we could make in terms of modifying behaviour, it does have some strong limitations about what it does to the life world of the learners.